Donald Trump is facing the absolute ultimate humiliation, not from the progressive opposition, but from deep within his own fiercely loyal inner circle. The very foundation of his America First political movement is violently cracking under the crushing weight of a devastating and unprecedented betrayal. David Pine, a highly respected national security expert and a previously unwavering supporter of the former president, has just dropped a catastrophic political bombshell that could completely shatter the upcoming national elections. He did the unthinkable. He used the word impeachment. This is not a standard political disagreement or a minor policy dispute. This is a monumental collapse of trust from a man who served as a distinguished combat arms officer and holds a Master of Arts degree in National Security Studies from a prestigious university. Pine is currently serving as a senior deputy director for a vital national homeland security task force. His entire professional career is built on protecting the homeland of the United States, and right now he sees the exact leader he passionately championed as the absolute greatest threat to that national security. He openly and fiercely accuses Donald Trump of intentionally subordinating the military forces of the United States to foreign interests, specifically risking the precious lives of millions of Americans for absolutely no valid strategic reason. The absolute core of the Make America Great Again campaign promise was ending endless foreign wars. Yet, the recent aggressive military actions taken against Iran tell an entirely different and terrifying story. By relentlessly pushing for a massive regional conflict and allegedly utilizing the Central Intelligence Agency to arm Kurdish opposition forces to spark a violent uprising, the former president is walking blindly into a disastrous trap. Pine predicts this exact recklessness will result in thousands of American soldiers returning home in body bags right before the citizens head to the voting booths. He views this unhinged strategy not just as a massive military failure, but as a deliberate, unforgivable abandonment of the exact loyal voting base who handed Donald Trump the presidency. The sheer panic within the conservative political establishment is completely palpable because when the most dedicated national defense experts publicly turn their backs, the ordinary voters inevitably follow. Hello and welcome to United States News Daily. We consistently bring you the unvarnished truth behind the biggest political earthquakes rapidly shaping our great nation. If you want to stay ahead of the traditional media narratives and deeply understand the real hidden forces driving these major historical shifts, please take a brief moment to subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell so you never miss an essential daily update. The deployment of the word impeachment by a staunch conservative national security operative completely shatters the usual partisan defense shields. Opposition politicians demanding removal from office represents standard political theater expected by the conservative voting base. However, when a decorated military veteran and ideological loyalist drops the ultimate constitutional penalty onto the desk of the commander-in-chief, the entire political landscape fractures permanently. David Pine crossed the ultimate red line of political loyalty because he perceived a fundamental betrayal of the very doctrine that brought the current administration into executive power. The accusation is not rooted in domestic scandals or minor financial improprieties. This severe charge centers entirely on the supreme duty of the president to protect the republic and prioritize American citizens above all foreign entities. According to this explosive public assessment, the current administration is actively and deliberately subordinating the armed forces of the United States to the geopolitical desires of the State of Israel. This represents a monumental and unforgivable shift from the core populist platform. Pine argues that utilizing American military might to further the expansionary designs of any foreign nation completely contradicts the foundational mandate of national defense. Pouring American blood and national treasure into the volatile sands of the Middle East to check Iranian influence on behalf of another sovereign nation is framed here not as a strategic partnership, but as a catastrophic surrender of American independence. The national security expert views this as an impeachable offense precisely because it risks the precious lives of millions of Americans for foreign objectives that yield absolutely zero tangible benefits for the homeland. Drawing a devastating historical parallel, the analysis compares the current executive trajectory directly to the monumental foreign policy failures of the George Walker Bush administration. Pine reminds the political right how the prolonged military occupation of Iraq systematically dismantled a secular republic, only to inadvertently transform it into an Iranian vassal state and a hostile Islamist stronghold. That specific conflict cost tens of thousands of American casualties and triggered a tragic wave of war-related suicides that devastated military families for an entire generation. By highlighting this incredibly dark chapter, the expert warns the conservative base that their chosen leader is blindly repeating the exact same neoconservative establishment mistakes he once aggressively campaigned against. The primary campaign promise was to drain the swamp of endless foreign wars, yet the current military actions perfectly mirror the deepest desires of the globalist war machine. The constitutional implications become absolutely staggering when a sitting president allegedly bypasses the legislative branch to wage unauthorized international warfare. The founding documents of the Republic specifically grant the power to declare war exclusively to the Congress. This vital separation of powers ensures that no single executive can ever drag the nation into endless foreign entanglements based on personal whim or undisclosed foreign influence. By allegedly ordering the Central Intelligence Agency to secretly arm foreign militias and operating completely outside the strict boundaries of congressional oversight, the executive branch is actively destroying the legal framework of the Republic. This blatant disregard for constitutional boundaries provides the exact legal foundation required for formal articles of impeachment. A conservative scholar pointing out this severe constitutional violation completely removes the protective layer of partisan bias. The psychological impact of this profound revelation on the core working-class voting demographic cannot be overstated. Working-class communities provide the overwhelming majority of the young men and women who courageously serve in the armed forces. These dedicated families rallied behind a populist message that explicitly promised to stop sacrificing their children for abstract globalist agendas or foreign territorial disputes. Realizing that the commander-in-chief might be treating their beloved sons and daughters as completely expendable pawns in a proxy war creates a profound and irreversible sense of betrayal. The absolute fury stems not just from the potential catastrophic loss of life, but from the sickening realization that the populist anti-war rhetoric was potentially nothing more than an elaborate and cruel political manipulation designed solely to secure ultimate executive power. The fundamental cornerstone of the populist revolution that captured the highest office in the land rested upon a singular and ironclad guarantee to the forgotten men and women of the country. That supreme guarantee was the absolute and total termination of endless foreign entanglements. Voters standing in freezing rain at massive rallies roared with overwhelming approval every single time the candidate mocked the political establishment for wasting American blood and treasure in the remote deserts of the Middle East. The campaign platform explicitly weaponized the deep war weariness of the working class. It painted the Washington elite as warmongering globalists who cared more about securing distant borders than protecting their own homeland. The working class electorate bought into this isolationist vision with absolute and unwavering faith. They genuinely believed they were electing a fierce peacemaker who would finally bring their beloved sons and daughters home for good. However, the chilling reality of the executive orders signed behind the resolute desk completely shatters that carefully crafted illusion. The actual military record of this administration exposes a staggering level of unprecedented aggression that utterly dwarfs the hawkish tendencies of previous political eras. Despite the constant barrage of anti-war rhetoric spewed across social media platforms and campaign stages, the commander-in-chief quietly authorized devastating military strikes against an astonishing 7 different sovereign nations within a remarkably condensed timeframe. The sheer geographical scope of this relentless bombing campaign is absolutely breathtaking and historically unprecedented for a leader claiming the mantle of peace. The administration launched devastating lethal operations in Iran, Nigeria, Venezuela, Iraq, Somalia, Syria, and Yemen. This is not a list compiled by political opponents attempting to smear the executive branch. This is the cold and undeniable and documented reality of unbridled military force unleashed upon the globe. In Syria, the military apparatus rained down destruction, while completely ignoring the previous loud demands to exit that specific theater of conflict. In Yemen, the executive branch aggressively continued to fuel a catastrophic humanitarian disaster by heavily supporting foreign bombing campaigns. This action directly contradicted the populist message of absolute non-intervention. In Somalia and Nigeria, covert and overt military operations expanded dramatically under the radar. These operations silently stretched the armed forces across the African continent, without any formal public debate or congressional authorization. Perhaps the most glaring and hypocritical examples of this massive betrayal involve the aggressive maneuvers executed in Venezuela and Iran. In both of these highly volatile nations, the administration actively participated in brazen efforts aimed at orchestrated regime change. The very same leader who built an entire political movement by viciously condemning previous administrations for overthrowing foreign dictators suddenly engaged in the exact same disastrous regime change playbook. Attempting to artificially remove sovereign leaders and violently dictate the internal political structures of foreign nations is the absolute pinnacle of the globalist agenda that the populist base fundamentally despises. When you meticulously analyze the historical data, a terrifying truth emerges from the smoke and rubble. No president in the modern era has ordered aggressive military strikes against as many uniquely different countries in such a terrifyingly short period. The administration essentially transformed the American military into a hyperactive global police force striking targets across multiple continents simultaneously. The candidate who promised to empty the foreign battlefields instead transformed the entire globe into an active free-fire zone. This is the exact opposite of an America First doctrine. It is a doctrine of chaotic and unfocused and extremely dangerous global domination driven entirely by unpredictable executive impulse. This massive expansion of international warfare occurred completely devoid of any constitutional oversight. The founding architecture of the Republic explicitly demands that the legislative branch thoroughly debate and authorize acts of war. Yet the current executive completely sidelined the elected representatives of the people by hoarding unilateral war powers to bypass any formal public scrutiny. Launching missiles into 7 different nations without a formal declaration of war, or even a basic strategic consultation with the legislature represents a terrifying slide toward absolute authoritarian control. The system of checks and balances was deliberately paralyzed to facilitate this unprecedented bombing spree. The grand tragic irony is that the massive defense industry experienced an era of unparalleled prosperity under this specific leadership. This industry was the exact shadowy entity the populist base sought to dismantle. Defense contractors secured massive financial windfalls as the administration replenished the rapidly depleting stockpiles of expensive munitions dropped across the Middle East and Africa. The promises of peace were quietly discarded in the luxurious boardrooms of weapons manufacturers. Meanwhile, the working-class communities were left completely blind to the fact that their chosen champion was actively fueling the exact endless wars he publicly condemned. Every single missile launched and every single drone strike authorized represents a profound and unforgivable betrayal of the core populist mandate. The brilliant political trick was convincing the most anti-war voter base in modern political history to enthusiastically cheer for the most aggressively hawkish president the modern world has ever witnessed. The sheer volume of these international military engagements totally obliterates the carefully maintained facade of the peace candidate. This volume reveals instead a chaotic administration deeply addicted to the lethal application of unbridled American military power. The voters asked for national renewal and secure borders, but they received a massive expansion of global conflict and destabilization. The ultimate consequence of this massive deception is the rapid erosion of public trust in the highest levels of government. When a leader forcefully campaigns on a platform of total withdrawal, but subsequently orders the military to bombard 7 separate nations, the entire concept of political accountability is destroyed. The working-class voters who formed the absolute backbone of the populist movement are now forced to watch their fundamental values being completely ignored by the very administration they fought so hard to elect. This blatant contradiction between the promised peace and the delivered warfare exposes a deeply cynical strategy designed solely to manipulate the masses. It proves that the fiery campaign speeches regarding foreign policy were nothing more than empty theatrical performances meant to secure electoral victory, while the actual intent was always to expand the imperial reach of the armed forces across the entire globe. Executing a high-ranking foreign official on foreign soil completely reshaped the geopolitical chessboard overnight. The administration severely miscalculated the profound cultural and religious dynamics of the Middle East when they authorized the lethal strike. By neutralizing a supreme political and military figure, they did not extinguish a threat but rather ignited a catastrophic inferno of anti-American sentiment. The targeted individual was instantly elevated from a controversial regional commander to a revered and untouchable martyr. This singular aggressive action miraculously unified deeply divided and fractured Iranian political factions under one single banner of absolute vengeance. The intelligence briefings flowing into the Oval Office severely underestimated the immense unifying power of a freshly minted religious martyr. Instead of forcing the adversary into quiet submission, this rash decision effectively handed the Iranian regime the ultimate propaganda victory. The regime weaponized the widespread grief and transformed it into a potent recruitment tool for extremist militias across the entire region. The supposed quick and decisive victory rapidly morphed into an unbreakable vow of eternal retaliation against American military assets. Compounding this initial monumental error is the utterly baffling strategy regarding the Kurdish opposition forces. Leaked reports from senior security officials indicate a clandestine operation led by the Central Intelligence Agency to heavily arm regional Kurdish fighters. The overarching goal is ostensibly to foment a massive popular uprising within western Iranian borders. This deeply flawed tactical blueprint borders on sheer strategic delusion. Relying on fragmented and lightly armed militia groups to topple a deeply entrenched and heavily militarized sovereign government is a recipe for absolute disaster. Security analysts stare in total disbelief at the fundamental geographical and demographic ignorance driving this covert operation. Iran is a massive and mountainous fortress nearly 4 times larger than the previous battleground of Iraq. The nation boasts a highly educated and fiercely patriotic population almost double the size of the Iraqi populace during the previous invasion. The terrain itself is a defensive dream consisting of rugged peaks and unforgiving deserts that would easily swallow an invading army. Attempting to conquer or even temporarily destabilize such a massive territory using proxy rebel groups and a handful of special operations forces is entirely suicidal. The logistical nightmares alone would instantly cripple any prolonged ground incursion. The idea that a localized rebellion could successfully dismantle a heavily fortified theocratic state backed by a massive Revolutionary Guard Corps shows a terrifying detachment from military reality. The most terrifying aspect of this unfolding crisis is the apparent absence of any coherent exit strategy. The executive branch leaped aggressively into the dark abyss of a massive regional conflict without a basic foundational understanding of the inevitable consequences. The seasoned military veteran David Pine publicly concluded that the commander-in-chief simply did not think through the likely outcomes of this monumental folly before pulling the proverbial trigger. The administration launched the most significant and volatile military escalation in the Middle East in 35 years based on gut instinct and ego rather than meticulous strategic planning. There is no overarching diplomatic framework and no coalition of willing international partners, and absolutely no realistic definition of what victory even looks like. The executive leadership acts as if managing a global superpower is akin to starring in a dramatic reality television program where conflicts are neatly resolved before the final scene. In the harsh and unforgiving reality of global warfare, there are absolutely no quick fixes or magical solutions. When an administration initiates a massive kinetic conflict based purely on political impulse, they trap the entire nation in a perpetual cycle of escalating violence. The adversary refuses to stop fighting because they view their struggle as a holy war for basic survival, while the administration views the conflict merely as a temporary display of tough posturing meant for domestic consumption. This fundamental disconnect between domestic political theater and brutal international battlefield reality guarantees a catastrophic military quagmire. A commander launching strikes simply because he had a fleeting feeling represents the ultimate nightmare for any serious military strategist. It reduces the awesome destructive power of the armed forces to the level of a volatile personal plaything wielded by a leader completely isolated from the horrific realities of the massive bloodshed he carelessly orchestrates. The administration walked blindly into an ancient trap and dragging the entire republic down into the quicksand alongside them. The chilling prophecy delivered by the conservative defense analyst focuses entirely on the inevitable human toll of this reckless military adventure. He explicitly warns of a protracted and bloody conflict lasting well over a year, culminating perfectly during the most vulnerable political season. The imagery he deliberately invokes serves as a brutal wake-up call to the political establishment. He explicitly predicts several thousand American service members returning to the homeland in flag-draped coffins precisely as voters prepare to cast their ballots. This specific, horrifying convergence of profound national grief and intense political vulnerability creates a completely inescapable trap for the ruling party. The political machinery relies heavily on projecting domestic stability and absolute strength to maintain their precarious majorities in the legislative chambers. However, attempting to secure re-election while heavy transport aircraft continuously unload the shattered remains of young citizens at domestic military bases represents an utterly insurmountable public relations nightmare. Conducting triumphant and boisterous political rallies while local communities simultaneously organize tragic military funerals would absolutely disgust the general electorate and shatter the carefully curated illusion of a victorious presidency. The primary demographic that originally propelled the populist movement to the highest office consists overwhelmingly of working-class families residing within rural heartlands and crucial battleground regions. These specific communities consistently supply the vast and overwhelming majority of enlisted personnel to the armed forces. They are deeply patriotic citizens who possess a proud and unbroken generational tradition of answering the call of duty. When the executive branch actively chooses a chaotic war of choice rather than a war of absolute national survival, they are directly gambling with the bloodlines of their most fervent and loyal supporters. The mothers and fathers who enthusiastically voted for an end to foreign deployments will suddenly find themselves utterly devastated, forced to bury their children over an undefined and murky objective in the Middle East. The white-hot fury that naturally arises from sacrificing a child for a failed geopolitical experiment transcends all traditional partisan loyalties. The sacred and unspoken bond of trust between the commander-in-chief and the military families breaks permanently the moment those grieving families realize their immense personal sacrifice was treated merely as a disposable political calculation. This impending wave of profound national sorrow absolutely terrifies the conservative members of the legislative branch. Senators and representatives who previously offered their blind and unquestioning obedience to the executive office now face the terrifying prospect of a catastrophic electoral wipeout. They understand intimately that they cannot possibly look a grieving and furious mother in the eye and successfully justify the horrific loss of a child over a hastily planned covert operation gone wrong. The desperate political survival instincts of these lawmakers will inevitably and violently clash with their previous demands for total party unity. As the grim casualty reports steadily rise, the current deafening silence from the congressional leadership will rapidly deteriorate into a panicked, chaotic scramble for political distance and total deniability. They will desperately attempt to erase their public records of any statements supporting the initial aggressive strikes. The looming and inescapable threat of facing utterly furious constituents at local town hall meetings, while wearing the heavy burden of complicity in a completely avoidable disaster, is a career-ending scenario. The toxic combination of mourning communities and terrified politicians creates the exact volatile environment required to fuel serious and unstoppable bipartisan momentum for formal removal proceedings. The military analyst explicitly highlighted that the tragic arrival of these casualties just in time for the crucial autumn elections would rapidly accelerate and legitimize the demands for another devastating impeachment effort. This time, the deafening calls for accountability would not merely echo from the progressive opposition, but would organically and violently erupt directly from the deeply betrayed conservative strongholds. When the severe consequences of unchecked executive hubris manifest as tangible and irreplaceable losses in suburban neighborhoods, the abstract debates concerning constitutional limits suddenly become fiercely and painfully personal. The voters will demand absolute and immediate accountability for the horrific toll exacted upon their communities. The protective political fortress currently surrounding the executive branch will inevitably and spectacularly crumble when the very citizens who built those walls demand harsh justice for the American blood carelessly spilled on foreign soil. The supreme legal document of the Republic explicitly reserves the awesome authority to initiate international conflict exclusively for the legislative branch. This deliberate design ensures that no single individual sitting in the executive office can ever plunge the nation into foreign bloodshed without rigorous public debate and formal authorization from the elected representatives of the people. Yet the current administration has entirely bypassed this fundamental democratic safeguard. By launching lethal overseas operations without seeking prior congressional approval, the executive branch has effectively usurped the most critical power granted to the legislature. This brazen overreach transforms a constitutional republic into a system resembling an imperial presidency where military force is deployed purely on personal whim rather than legal mandate. The foundational system of checks and balances is currently facing its most severe and existential threat in modern political history. Prominent opposition leaders have frantically sounded the alarm regarding this unprecedented power grab. Senator Elizabeth Warren emerged from a highly classified intelligence briefing with a terrifying assessment for the general public. She stated clearly that the situation is significantly worse than anyone outside the secure briefing room could possibly comprehend. She confirmed that the administration lacks any coherent strategic plan and launched this aggressive military campaign based entirely on fabricated narratives rather than any actual imminent threat to the homeland. Governor Gavin Newsom echoed this profound concern by highlighting the complete absence of any desire from the executive branch to explain the underlying justification for these specific strikes to the public. He pointed out that the commander-in-chief showed absolutely zero interest in engaging with the citizenry or their elected officials to define the actual danger or present a clear objective. This blatant disregard for legal constraints sets the stage for a sprawling and borderless conflict. When an administration operates completely outside the strict boundaries of congressional oversight, they possess the terrifying capability to expand military engagements infinitely across the globe. An illegal war launched on mere intuition inevitably drags the entire country into an endless quagmire without any defined geographical limits or strategic exit points. The ultimate danger lies not just in the immediate destruction overseas, but in the total collapse of the democratic institutions legally designed to prevent such catastrophic unilateral decisions. The absolute collapse of the isolationist political illusion is now completely undeniable. The once untouchable champion of the working class has fundamentally abandoned the very foundation that secured his unprecedented electoral victory. When a highly decorated national security expert from his own fiercely loyal political faction publicly denounces his executive actions as an impeachable betrayal of the Republic, the carefully constructed facade of putting the homeland first shatters into millions of irreversible pieces. This defining moment represents the ultimate crossroads for every single patriotic voter who previously placed their blind faith in a man promising lasting peace but delivering globalized warfare instead. The critical choice currently facing the electorate is no longer about standard partisan loyalty or traditional ideological divides. It is a profound moral test asking whether citizens will remain stubbornly loyal to a deeply flawed individual politician or remain steadfastly loyal to the fundamental survival and constitutional integrity of their own nation. The unvarnished truth is finally out in the open, exposing a terrifying reality where the lives of brave service members are treated as entirely disposable political currency. We deeply appreciate you taking the time to uncover the absolute truth with us here at United States News Daily. Unmasking these monumental political shifts requires a highly dedicated community of independent critical thinkers. If this vital information opened your eyes to the hidden realities of our national defense policies, please subscribe to our channel right now and join our rapidly growing movement for absolute accountability. Share this crucial video directly with your closest friends and your family members across all of your social media platforms because every single voter absolutely needs to hear this urgent warning before heading to the ballot box. We want to hear your unfiltered voice regarding this massive betrayal. Drop your deepest personal thoughts and your own political predictions down in the comments section below. Will the conservative voter base finally break away? Or will they follow this executive leadership blindly into another endless conflict? Let us know your exact thoughts right now.